Do you avoid the Italian section of your local wine store? Well, I don't blame you. It can be daunting. Maybe you just go in and grab a bottle of Valpolicella and get the heck out of there. Well, on this episode, we're going to be talking about a wine from Italy that you must try. Also, I went to Italy. We're going to be talking about that and so much more on this episode of The Average Wine Enthusiast. Hi there, everybody. My name's Mike LaPlante, and I'm the Average Wine Enthusiast. On this episode, we are going to talk about a wine from Italy. That wine, Chianti. Why is that? Because I just got back from Italy, discovered much of the Tuscany area and a little bit beyond that area. And I don't think that I could talk about wine from Tuscany without talking about Chianti. It is probably the largest wine region within Tuscany. There are a few other ones, but Tuscany prides itself on its Chianti. Now, what is Chianti? Well, Chianti is, what it isn't is what it has kind of transformed from. Chianti has a long history dating back to the 13th century when, the Medici family, who owned the banks and the judges and mostly the church, and they set up this land that they fought usually with the folks down in Siena over this land in between the city of Florence and the city of Siena. So what you had was this beautiful plot of land where they grew these grapes for these ultra rich people, and these wines were highly sought after. So areas outside of Chianti wanted to be, part of this fold where they could charge more money for their wine. And what usually happens then, of course, is the quality of the wine goes down. Well, of course, because it gets diluted by grapes that aren't quite as good as the really good stuff. So Chianti kind of grew into this shadow of its former self, basically. And so what they realized they had to do was tighten up the rules about what can be called a Chianti and what can't be. So basically what they did is they took the old version of the Chianti region and called it Chianti Classico. And so this is where, if you want to put Chianti Classico on your label, you have to follow a bunch of rules, including having to be within the Chianti Classico region of Italy. There are other Chianti regions around that make great wine. Most of these wines, Chianti wines, are based on Sangiovese, which is a very prevalent grape in Tuscany, and it grows fantastically. It's a thin-skinned grape, so it doesn't give off a lot of color. So what a lot of Chiantis are blends, and these blends, of course, can only be a certain percentage of the total wine. But one of these wines that they put in there is for the color. Colorino is the name of the grape. But I guess they're trying to use other grapes. They're trying to get away from Colorino, from what I understand. I learned a ton about Chianti while I was there. I'd like to just relay some of that information to you. And what's another grape they use? Canaiolo, which is another grape that rounds things off, because Sangiovese can be crunchy, a little lively, especially especially when it's new, but it's delicious. They also blend Cabernet Sauvignon and Merlot with, so those are what they call them international grapes. Of course, they get their origins from France, and but they are allowed to put in a certain percentage of these grapes to make a Chianti. Of course, now this Chianti region went through many changes. Of course, it was small, then it got big, and then it got diluted, and now it got back to small again. So I think what we're seeing now is a really good well, it's the oldest wine region that, has its own DOC in it. So I think things are pretty much cemented in place in terms of what you're going to get when you get a Chianti. As little, like before 1984, a lot of the Chiantis that were sold here in North America were not very good wines. It was just stuff that was shipped across. And, I think in the 80s is when people really started getting serious in a big way about wine. Yeah, I remember being a kid, and you would see these bottles of wine in these baskets. And they were like, people turned them into candle holders and everything. That basket, by the way, is called a fiasco. Kind of makes you wonder where the word fiasco came from when it refers to something that's, a bit of a kerfuffle. So now that we have Chianti in its, the form that it's going to take now, and the Chianti Classico area really taking the lead in terms of making these really excellent wines. It's great stuff, and it's still something that they're working very hard at. I can tell you a story. We went to a winery called Vitaccio, and they still had barriques in there from before the 80s. She said they were over 60 years old, so.
When it is in the big barrels, and of course we don't change them. So if we are good
so these barriques were holding wine at one time that really wasn't very good at, it was called Chianti, but it was not the Chianti that it would become. I'm sure they, different practices came about. They didn't use such big yields per acre. They used different clones. They did a lot to improve the quality of Chianti right in the vineyard. So it was really interesting tour we had at Fattoria Viticcio. Great Chianti place there. So you can still get pretty tasty Chianti wines here in North America at a pretty decent price. Sure, you can pay, up to 60, 70, 80 bucks for Chianti Classico at the LCBO here, which I went and got this bottle at. I did bring some home with me from Italy, but I'm not going to open that quite yet. Here I have a 2020 Clemente the 7th, which is the name of the wine because there's a story on the back, and I'm going to read the story. A member of the Florentine Medici family, the Giulia da Medici, he became Pope. The banker's family cousin became Pope, and his name was Clemente the 7th in 1523. And he used to live in Campoli in the Chianti Classico area where today these grapes are grown. So this is from a vineyard that was used by the Pope back in 1532. I'm not sure what you can gather from that. Like the Pope, who was from the biggest powerful family in Italy, they owned all the banks, and like I said, they owned the church, and obviously they owned the church. This guy probably bought his way into the papacy. I shouldn't say that because I don't know that, but just on the surface of it, it seems that way. Excuse me. So that's where this is from. So these lands where these Sangiovese grew is the same land that was owned by Pope Clemente the 7th. So what do we have here? We have a wine that is somewhat light in color. I'd call that pale garnet. And this has been open for a little while, so it had time to get some air. Takes me right back to Italy. There was not many wines that I drank in Italy that I didn't like, and I even drank some Lambrusco, which I may even do a show on. That's up in the Bologna, Parma area. So we got strawberries, cherries. There's a herbaceousness in there as well, like some kind of leaf, basil maybe, a nuttiness. Let's give it a taste. Mm. That is so good. There's a bit of a nutty flavor on there, some blackberries, more cherries, maybe a little hint of cinnamon. A very excellent wine. There's something about Sangiovese grapes that are unique. They don't. It has the characteristics of a lot of wines that I like: Cabernet Franc, Cabernet Sauvignon, Syrah, and it's just fantastic wine to be drinking if you're looking to explore some Italian wine and you don't want to keep buying Valpolicella's. I would highly recommend getting a Chianti Classico. That's where I would start. And if you want to start exploring the other Chianti areas, which you'd probably be hard pressed to find some of those, but I saw at least one bottle of a Chianti from another region besides the Chianti Classico region. That is so good. On the finish, it's like it's creamy, and it lasts just a beautiful amount of time. I'm trying to think if it's full-bodied. Not necessarily. Really close, medium to full body, right in between there. Maybe that's what makes it so nice. It's so elegant, so complex. It's just amazing. It takes me right back to the vineyards of Tuscany. That's for sure. That's all I'm going to talk about Chianti for now. What I would like to talk to you about is another wine that you should probably be drinking that I learned about from going to Tuscany. There is a region in Tuscany where it's known mostly for its Super Tuscans. What the heck's a Super Tuscan? Well, Super Tuscans are wines that don't follow the DOC or the DOCG rules. And those wines are classified under a classification known as IGT, Indication Geographica Typica. What does that mean? We don't need no stinking rules, is basically what it sounds like to me. We're just going to make some wine from here, and we'll tell you where it's from. It's Toscana, and we're going to do what we want to do. So one of these regions is called Bulgari, and that is where the Super Tuscans come from. It's very well known for a Super Tuscan known as Sassicaia, which reminds me a lot of another conspicuously consumptioned wine that is, bought because of its price tag, basically. Generally speaking, wines from Bulgari are medium priced. Some are more expensive, but you could say that about Chianti wines as well. But then there's Sassicaia, which I want to say it has its own appellation, or sub-appellation, I should say. One winery, one sub-appellation. That's kind of wacky, but you see that kind of thing in Burgundy too, now that I think about it. So that's where Sassicaia is from, Bulgari. But when I first got to Florence, I like to start with white wine, no matter what. If I know I'm going to be drinking wine, I want some white wine. And I came across this wine, Vermentino. It's a white wine, and the Vermentino that I got was from Bulgari. So I knew Bulgari because I knew this is where all these Super Tuscans come from. But apparently they also grow Vermentino grapes. Well, I said that sounds good, and I loved it. And every time I saw it on a wine menu, I tried to get a glass of it. So I got home and I tried to see if I could find some, I want to call it Bulgarian. It's not Bulgarian, it's wine from Bulgari. And it's Vermentino. This one is Vermentino from Tenuta Guado El Tasso. And this is part of the Antinori group. Huge wine conglomerate, we'll just call them, They own a lot of wineries all over the world, I want to say. Definitely in the United States and in Italy for sure. So this is a 2023 Vermentino from Bulgari. I want to say this was less than 25, but more than 20. The same holds true for the Clemente the 7th. It was $22.95, I believe. Oh, it reminds me of a Sauvignon Blanc. So juicy and fruity on the nose. Just pops out. Like it's got melon and lemons, papaya, persimmon. Tons of white fruit in here. Then on the palate, you get that sweetness that you would get from like a melon, maybe a honeydew. But also you get this acidity that is fantastic, that really holds the wine up and gives you this beautiful finish. Vermentino, maybe one of my favorite new grapes. Oh, and there's like an apricot. Apricot is something that I'm definitely getting a smell of. Vermentino from Bulgari. I'll show something here that where you can get that if you live in Ontario, and the deets on that. So that's one of my discoveries. I had many other discoveries when I went to Italy, which is why I went there, because I wanted to learn a thing or two about Italian wine. Italian wine is such a huge subject, somewhat daunting for most people, I would say, especially when you're just trying to, get into your wine journey. I know that was the case with me. The only way you can really learn about Italian wine is to drink Italian wine. And also going there, I drank my fair share of Italian wine before I left. And, well, maybe I didn't drink my fair share. But once I got there, I really wanted to learn. And they're really good there as far as serving wine from the area that, whether you're at a restaurant or whatever, you rarely have an issue finding local wines in Tuscany. Case in point was it was the very first winery I went to. In fact, we had some other agenda. We went to Bologna, checked out the city, and then we had some time before our reservation at our restaurant, because restaurants don't open until 7:30. So we had some time, and I just looked up this winery that was on the outskirts of Bologna. Said it was open till 7:30 on a Thursday. I knew that wasn't right. So we pulled up. There's one car in the parking lot. It's off to the side. So I knew there was nobody there. But this woman came out, and she told us she didn't speak very good English and that she's not open, and they only have tastings on the weekend. One thing leads to another. I just ask a question or two about her wine, and then that turns into 10 questions and 20 questions. The next thing you know, she's pulling out bottles of rosé, and we're sitting outside, and it's just her and my wife's family sitting outside drinking this wine. It was Manaresi was the name of the winery, and it's just her and her husband. I love those setups. And he takes care of the field, she takes care of the facilities. And then we went to a restaurant that was recommended by a friend of mine who goes to Italy a lot. And we get to this restaurant, and sure enough, they have the Manaresi, a red version of something that we didn't try at her winery, and it was delicious. It was cool that we saw a wine on the menu that was at the, it was with the winery that we had went to earlier in the day. I guess that's going to do it for this episode. I want to thank you for watching, and I'd also like to ask you if you know any friends who are like you watching videos about wine on YouTube. Turn them on to the Average Wine Enthusiast. I'd really appreciate. You know what else I really appreciate is the Big Organ Trio letting me use their music on the show. I guess that's it for now, everybody. Thanks for watching. My name is Mike LaPlante. I'm the Average Wine Enthusiast. Until next time, salute! Salute!